Thank you for joining us. My name is Ian Ofula. We do have a packed bulletin lined up just for you. Former IEBC Chief Executive Officer James Oswago is currently appearing before the Parliamentary Accounts Committee as the ghosts of the 2013 general election come back to haunt him. PSC, now chaired by Rarieda Member of Parliament Nicholas Gumbo, also invited Deputy CEO Beatrice Nyabuto and the Director of Voter Registrations Immaculate Kasait. The three will explain audit queries raised by Auditor General Edward Ouko in the procurement of voter registration and electronic identification kits. KTN's Aaron Ochieng is there now, joins us for a live update. Aaron, what is the latest?
Well, the question here that is being asked is why Space Technology, having quoted a number that was almost 1 billion shillings higher than what IEBC had budgeted for, was given the tender to supply this equipment during the last general election. And the CEO at the time, James Oswago, is being questioned the rationale of the procurement process that eventually ended with Space Technologies getting this particular tender. And from what he's saying is that actually his hands were tied and that decisions were made that he could not overturn. And in part of his defense, he's saying that at some point there was a meeting that was chaired by the current chair of IEBC together with the 8 commissioners, that from that particular meeting is when all indications were that Space Technologies was actually going to be given the tender come what may. Yes.
Maybe, Aaron, if you could just give us a background on, how these officials ended up at the PSC for some of those who have not been following this story. How did this happen?
Well, as you know, during the last general election, there were kits that were procured by IEBC. These kits were used in the voter registration. These kits were supposed to be used during the election. And if you remember, most of them failed, and they could not be able to perform as expected. But the Auditor General also investigated the manner in which these equipment were procured, and he gave a report. And the Auditor General report indicates that there was massive irregularities in the manner in which the kits were procured. In particular, the CEO, according to the report, has been as someone that actually floated the procurement process, and that is why he, together with other officials from IEBC, together, if you could remember, last week the lady in charge of ICT, Ms. Gondi, was also summoned by the PSC, and we're also expecting other officials to be summoned here at the PSC. So the bottom line is that the Parliamentary Accounts Committee is following up on the Auditor General report that named a number of IEBC officials as having been involved in the flawed procurement process. Yeah.
Finally, Aaron, before I let you go, so what do we expect at the end of this meeting?
Well, we're expecting the CEO, as he's continuing, the former CEO rather, as he continues, he is trying to shed light on the manner in which the procurement process was done. But based on what the CEO will say is when this particular committee will sit down and draw its report, not only the CEO, but also evidence from the CEO, but also from other officials from the IEBC, both who are still serving and others who have already left. So we're expecting the PSC to present its report formally after this whole process to Parliament for either adoption or rejection. Then we'll see whether some names will be taken to court. If not, the action that will be taken by Parliament. Yes.
Thank you very much. That is KTN's Aaron Ocheng joining us from the hearing where former IBC Chief Executive Officer James Oswago is appearing before the Parliament's Accounts Committee, of course, answering some of the queries that were raised of an audit and concerns raised by Auditor General Edward Oko. Let's just cross borders a bit now, and at least 13 people have now been confirmed dead and 40 others injured from yesterday's blast in Mogadishu, Somalia. The attack on Jazeera Palace Hotel has been described by witnesses as one of the worst scenes of destruction ever witnessed in the capital city. Here is the latest on that story. These are the remains of Mogadishu's Jazeera Hotel, now considered a constant target of the Al-Shabaab militia group. This time, they almost reduced it to nothing except for the concrete walls barely holding up. This latest attack claiming at least 13 lives and leaving 40 other people injured. Al-Shabaab say they take full responsibility in avenging for last week's assault, where the Somali government and the African Mission to Somalia troops captured 2 key towns from them. Bardera and Dilso were the last strongholds of the group, where they had been in control since 2008. The Jazeera Hotel is popular for hosting international diplomats and even houses several embassies, among them China, Qatar and Egypt. But the Kenya Defense Forces, which is part of AMISOM, said last week that these were the last kicks of a dying horse for the group. Sentiments reiterated by US President Barack Obama during his tour to Kenya. He emphasized that terrorism cannot be tolerated, further supporting the KDF's mission in Somalia to end the insurgency of the Al-Qaeda-linked group Al-Shabaab. Well, let us now shift focus a bit to another story where President Barack Obama, of course, was just talking about the importance of supporting women in the country. And, of course, he was saying that the FGM should be fought greatly. Of course, we shall be joined by Josephine Kulea, who was mentioned by President Obama for her exemplary work. She will be joining us in an interview live from our city center in just a bit. Moving on now, when President Barack Obama addressed counterterrorism issues in his visit to Kenya, he advised the Kenyan government that extrajudicial killings would not solve the problem. Last night, KTN hosted the Permanent Secretary of the Interior Ministry, Ambassador Monica Juma, where this question also came up. Here now is how the PS responded.
Right. President Barack Obama also talked about marginalization and exclusion of minority communities, even making comparisons with how they were able to make attempts at healing the rift between the U.S. government and the Muslim community in the United States. And he pointed out that extrajudicial killings are counterproductive in the war on terror. We've seen in this country clerics in Mombasa disappearing. We've seen disappearances, several family members in various parts of the northern rift of this country, talking about profiling, talking about their loved ones going missing. I'd just like your comments on that.
Well, you will probably know, Yvonne, that you've also seen a group of 85 Kenyans that have returned. Those had also been defined as having disappeared. We have Kenyans that are leaving this country to train in Somalia, to fight in other areas, and we actually have been in a very deep discussion about foreign fighters. It is one of the big issues, and that is why you have had the government issue an amnesty. You have had us calling for parents to report if kids go missing, and we have had people that have gone missing and come back to actually operate or organize or undertake an operation against us. So this is not about extrajudicial this, extrajudicial that. Actually, as a matter of fact, since January, we've not had any such case, but I think we've had repeated stories that keep being repeated without any fact. What we have seen is that police officers, security officers have been targeted repeatedly. And so what the issue here, and what President Obama was saying in that discussion, which was quite interactive, I have to say, was how do we improve Kenya and America, in fact, because this is not just a Kenyan problem, it's not a regional problem, it's a global problem. And this discussion is going on across the globe. How do we improve our capacity to include everybody in a way that they can contribute to securing their nation and their spaces, as communities, as regions, as countries, and as the world? And so this is the context within which this discussion took place. And frankly, there were no issues around extrajudicial killings. I don't know where this has come from.
How about the perception of certain communities feeling left out or targeted in the war on corruption? Residents of Isili will continue to complain about them being targeted every time there's an attack. Could you speak to that? It may be a perception, but rightfully so. Could you speak to that about assuring them that they will be included in the war on terror rather than the targets of it?
Not that they will be included. We've already begun to do that. As a matter of fact, if you look at places where we piloted, like in Mombasa, you will remember that a number of mosques in Mombasa had actually been taken by very radical young clerics. And it took the cooperation between the government and the community to actually flush out these radical clerics and to take over what had been taken away from them. So this is not something we are going to begin. It is something that is going on, and what we are thinking about is how to scale it. It's how to scale it. Now, Isili keeps coming up. Every time you have a discussion, a little bit, you know, Isili this, Isili that.
Right, yeah.
May I confirm here that since we had that operation on Isili, which flushed out many thousands of aliens that had no documentation, we returned some were refugees that were in the town without any permission, in view of the procedures that are required, and are returned back to the camps. Can I confirm that Nairobi has not had an attack? Because that is the fact. So I think we need to roll this over to the what is the fact on the ground. And I think we have to just move away from these narratives that are really almost spurious to a certain degree. You know, and this question about marginalization, we've moved on this country. If you look at the way the structures, whether it is a devolution, whether it is the level of participation, whether
Well, just to continue a bit with that discussion, I'm joined by analyst Jarvis Bigambo. On one hand, the government is saying that, look, Usalama Watch, the operation was quite successful, and since then we haven't had many or any other attacks, so to say. On the other hand, the civil society is saying it wasn't carried out in the right way. What do you think about this?
First of all, the issue of extrajudicial executions must not be sanitized. The fact that the claim on the part of government is that it has not happened since should not mean that it was acceptable in the first place. In fact, I think investigations need to be launched into the extrajudicial executions, and those who were behind it or were culpable will be brought to book. That's the first thing that needs to, to happen. And even the entire issue of the concentration camp at Kasrani and all that, much as we know very well, it was a question of trying to rein in illegal immigrants in this country. It brings focus on the necessity of seeing how the policing itself is given, acceptable approach and standards. The best practices of policing, even if it's a question of rooting out terror, it's something that the government should be keen on. And you see, far too many people have disappeared, whether it's at the coast and various places in this country, and it should be in the interest of government to account for all these persons who have disappeared. The issue of enforced disappearances and extrajudicial executions is something that contravenes the provisions of the Constitution of Kenya 2010 under the Bill of Rights.
Well, and in regards to that, do you think that it is targeted towards one community, and what message are we sending? Because recently the perception about the Somalis living in Kenya has been quite negative.
If we have to speak to the truth, then fact is that since the commencement of the war on terror, there has been so much of profiling, and those who've suffered so much for it are the people of Somali descent and origin, and that's why you see that in every swoop that has taken place, it's them who've suffered so much for it, whether it's in Isli and the coast, the entire strip. They're the ones who've suffered for it. The profiling, and even if we were to look back in retrospect to the remarks of the US President Barack Obama, the issue of profiling, whether it's on grounds of whether it's religion or race, tribe, it's something that does not catalyze good governance. And so if at all we have to rise to claim good governance, then the profiling, whatever sites we have trained on, whether it's fighting terror or etc., profiling should not have a space for that.
Well, during his address, Obama also said that having the civil society could be a way towards addressing terrorism in the country, having the civil society talk to some of these groups that are targeted for recruitment into Al-Shabaab. Do you think this could help the country towards ending terrorism?
Well, civil society itself plays a very crucial role. Historically, even in this country, it has played a very crucial role, even toward getting the new constitution in Kenya. We've seen that the provisions, various provisions of the constitution, mirror some of the thoughts and agitations of the civil society. However, I think recent efforts have seen the shrinking, possible shrinking of the space for the civil society, especially, for instance, with the introduction of the PBO Act, which seeks to restrict financing to civil society organizations from foreign donor agencies to only a possible 15% foreign, so that the rest should be local. And we know very well that historically government has not financed civil society in this country. But also looking at the manner in which, for instance, the civil society carried or conducted itself when it met President Obama, it performed dismally. Because if you look at some of the questions that civil society actors or representatives raised when they met President Obama, it seemed so much like complaining or raising issues so that President Obama can speak to government to address them. And in fact, the right questions that the civil society should be asking or should have asked did not take place. The civil society missed a critical chance to see how the civil society platform could be raised for global partnerships and engagement, to the extent that it could make the civil society actors in this country, the non-state actors, work to see how to fundamentally transform or impact positively on governance issues, the way it happened in the United States or across Europe and even in the US itself. But here in Kenya, if it's a question of the civil society waiting to see how to raise concerns, for example, remember even how President Obama's rebuttal to the question on the issues of devolution and the like, and he said, it's up to Kenyans. The US cannot come in to direct Kenyans on how to implement the devolved government here. And so the civil society itself should see how to position itself to impact positively on good governance in this country than waiting to raise questions with Big Brother.
But while you argue that, I think one of the crucial issues they were raising is that their accounts have been frozen, and so they wanted Obama to help them like intervene in the government to let them work freely. We had Haki Africa and Muslims for Human Rights. So don't you see that this should have been on top of the agenda?
Well, you see, first of all, the issue, the approach that the freezing of the accounts maybe should have been more decent or more appropriate than the way in which it was done. But more importantly, you realize that if it was a question of trying to investigate on terror-related issues, then in the interest of national security, that should be done. But once that has been done, then freezing should take place. But more than that, you see, why, and even with the court ruling that followed that, the central bank was and the various banks, commercial banks, where these guys bank, were not party to that case, and that's why even the ruling did not give a provision for the unfreezing. I think it's important that issues of such a nature, while they have got global implications, it's important that it commences conversations locally on how civil society themselves need to act and perform their duties and responsibilities in a manner that is agreeable to the furtherance of the cohesion of a nation. And more importantly, you realize that it's not all the accounts of civil societies that have been frozen, much as it affects the acting of all the civil society organizations, but it's only the accounts of of 2 institutions that were frozen.
Well, Jarvis, we're going to hold this conversation a bit later, and of course so that we just understand how we can counter terrorism in the country. Right now, I just want to cross over to our I&M studios, where during his public address on Sunday at the Safaricom Indoors Arena, US President Barack Obama castigated negative old traditions and habits, which he said have served to drag the country down. Well, one of the people he mentioned was Josephine Kulea. She has been rescuing FGM victims since 2011. Josephine is here in our city center studios, and she now joins us to tell us more about her project. Well, Josephine, before we get even into the details of what you do, how was it like to have the president, and not just the president, the most powerful man on earth, mention your name and acknowledge your work? Well, Josephine, thank you very much for joining us. I'm asking you, how does it feel to have the most powerful man on earth and the President of the United States recognize some of the work that you have been doing in the country?
It feels good, and I appreciate that he did that, because I appreciate that he did that because most of the time we don't get to hear our leaders mention some of these things affecting girls and women in our communities. So yeah, it was really a proud moment for us as an organization, and Obama being a women fighter, I've had him not once, not twice, all his speeches is consistent on women and girls issues, so it was a great moment for Samburu Girls Foundation.
Well, Josephine, you've been fighting FGM and early marriages since 2011. What actually inspired you to do this?
My childhood experience. I grew up in my community facing, I've gone through some of these harmful cultural practices, and going to school made a difference for me, and I felt going back and doing the same, protecting other girls who have no chance. My time there were no laws protecting us as children, but now the laws are clear in this country, and that motivated me to go back to my community and make a difference.
I also understand that your mother was also fighting FGM back then, and this also sort of inspired you. Wasn't she afraid to go against your culture?
Yeah, my mom was taken out of Form 2 to be married to my dad as one of his 3 wives, and she really wanted to finish school, but since she did not, she vowed that her children will finish school. So she really fought for us to be in school, and when my dad died when we were young, she continued protecting us. She actually refused to be inherited, and so that she had an upper hand on standing up for us, and that's what she did until we were able to finish high school.
Well, Josephine, we shall go more into what you've done and how you do it so that other people can get perhaps some inspiration, and that will come in our second interview during part 2 of this bulletin. But for now, the Global Entrepreneurship Summit lived up to its expectation as the biggest event this year in Kenya. However, entrepreneurs in the Western region have mixed reactions about the founder, and the proprietors of a school in Kakamega says that it is a noble forum and hopes that the next one will be more inclusive.
Very much. This is D School Center, the only learning center of its kind in Kakamega and in Africa. Well, the idea that made this a viable business is that of using games to make learning fun for children. Mr. Wycliffe Kibisio, the director, what makes you think you're a leading entrepreneur?
I'm a leading entrepreneur because I use the power of technology to deliver learning to all children in Africa.
What have you heard about the Global Entrepreneurship Summit?
Yeah, one of the things that I've understood, which is a very good idea, is that it has come to Kenya, and this is the first time it is in Africa and being opened by the President of United States.
Do you feel it has been inclusive for all entrepreneurs?
Yes, I believe that Kenya had to take the best shot ahead, and we believe that the people who are there will represent us, and us will continue also striving to ensure that we can achieve, because we believe that the team that you have taken there will represent some of us, and others who have remained wherever we are also going to ensure that we can strive. It is actually like taking only a number to that team, because they can't take all of us. But all in all, is that we are actually saying that we have a lot of entrepreneur Kenyans who are actually looking forward to what is going to come out from the Africa Summit.
And do you feel you'd have done something big if you had been representing Kenya this year?
I would say is that because this school has actually been most of the time working with the shule za mashinani or in the groundwork. So we are still doing our groundwork to ensure that we can admit as many schools as possible. And eventually we know that we will be represented in other forums. Yeah.
Now, the late Whitney Houston's daughter, Bobby Christina, is dead. 22-year-old Bobby died 6 months after she was found unconscious in a bathtub. Here is that story.
As the adorable daughter of pop icon Whitney Houston, Bobby Christina Brown was thrust into the spotlight at a tender age.
If I got my baby.
Born in Livingston, New Jersey in 1993, she was the only child of Houston and R&B singer Bobby Brown. At just 12 years old, her family's drama was turned into reality TV fodder on Being Bobby Brown.
I'm watching you, young lady.
Then, in 2012, tragedy. Whitney died suddenly. Her mother's shocking death sending Bobby to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles.
I'm going to make it now. It's going to be good.
As Bobby tried to recover from the loss, cameras went along for Lifetime's The Houstons on Her Own.
Did you see how happy you are? I really was.
We gotta find this girl again.
That girl's just been there a lot. I miss her so much.
Estranged from her father for nearly 2.5 years after Whitney's death, she shared this photo of them reuniting in June of 2014. Her parents struggled with addiction, and Bobby, too, faced allegations of drug use.
I wanted to do the right thing. And all I'm trying to do is guide her to the right place in her life.
But Bobby tried to move forward, explaining on Oprah's Next Chapter how she was coping with her mother's death.
I can hear her voice, you know, in spirit talking to me and telling me, you know, keep moving, baby. You know, I'm right here. I got you.
As Bobby Christina dealt with the loss of her mother, she sparked a romance with Nick Gordon. The relationship raised eyebrows. Days before she was found unresponsive in a bathtub at the home she shared with Gordon, she posted these photos on Instagram and tweeted, "Miss you, Mommy, so much. Loving you more every second." Now, more than 3 years after her mother's death, the 22-year-old's life also cut short by pain and tragedy.
Quite a sad story. May Bobby rest in peace. Let's cross over to sports now, where thousands of fans watched 6,500 athletes from the 165 nations march into the Los Angeles Coliseum for the opening ceremonies of the Special Olympics World Games on Saturday night. The gathering was the largest for a single event in Los Angeles, surpassing the 1984 Olympic Games. The athletes paraded before the lighting of the Special Olympics cauldron. U.S. athlete Destiny Sanchez carried the torch over the final distance and then performed the ceremony to light the cauldron. First Lady Michelle Obama also attended to help officially open the games. The athletes are scheduled to participate in 25 sports over the next 9 days. Well, and that marks the end for our viewers, for Newsdesk rather, for our viewers on KTN. But Newsdesk continues on KTN News. My name is Yanofula. Enjoy the rest of your viewing.